Welcome everyone to the Oxford Real Farming Conference session on supporting meat supply chains and what next for small abattoirs, kindly hosted by the Sustainable Food Trust. My name is John Mettrick and I'm chair of the Abattoir Sector Group, whose aim is to provide a uniform voice for the small abattoir sector and to advise government on behalf of industry. I'm also a small abattoir owner and accredited master butcher, and I've been in the meat trade over 40 years. Just to tell you how this short session will work, we have 7 speakers, all of which have been primed with a question in advance, as they only have around 5 minutes each. As the speakers give their answers, could you please place any questions you may have in the chat box? Megan and Bonnie from the SFT will monitor these questions, and towards the end of the session, we will endeavour to put these to our panel. So let me quickly introduce this afternoon's guest speakers in running order. We've got Patrick Holden from the SFT. Patrick is a founding director and CEO of the Sustainable Food Trust, and is also an organic dairy farmer in West Wales. One of the SFT's core work areas has been the campaign for local abattoirs, and more broadly, work to encourage the relocalisation of food systems. They are also founding members of the Abattoir Sector Group. Then we've got Kath Dalmeny of Sustain. Kath is the CEO of Sustain, the Alliance for Better Food and Farming. A key area of work for Sustain is the importance of short supply chain infrastructure and local networks in building and strengthening local agroecological food systems. Then we've got Tom Blunt from the RBST. Tom is a field officer with the Rare Breed Survival Trust and a conservation charity whose purpose is to secure the continued existence and viability of the UK's native livestock breeds. Then we've got Andy Gray. Andy is a farmer from Elston Farm in Devon and also runs the Meat Box Company, which is an online butcher's shop selling meat across the UK. Andy recently became involved with Fir Farm's mobile abattoir project and has been supporting the licensing process for the unit, which is currently located on his farm in Devon. Then we have Peter Greig. Peter is a founder of Piper's Farm, which works with 40 small-scale farmers in the southwest. They prioritise native breeds and pasture-based systems and therefore rely on the services of a local abattoir. Peter has been a great supporter of the campaign for local abattoirs for a number of years. Then we have John Powell. John is the head of agriculture sectors at DEFRA and chairs the Small Abattoir Working Group, which has been working with industry to address some of the problems facing small abattoirs. And last but not least, we have Marisa Heath of the Abattoir Sector Group. Marisa is the administrator of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Animal Welfare, whose report on small abattoirs in 2020 recommended the creation of the Abattoir Sector Group, which Marisa facilitated in setting up. Marisa will now be co-chairing the Small Abattoir Working Group with John Powell, supporting government and industry to work together. So I'd like to introduce Patrick for the first question, which was, why are small abattoirs too important to sustainability, Patrick?
Thank you very much for including me in this session. I want to speak as a farmer, but also give a strategic view. And my message is really quite simple. We are lucky enough on this farm in West Wales to have an abattoir, which is about 6 miles from the farm. But interestingly enough, it's very hard to book animals in these days. But the abattoir is just outside Tregaron. It's an absolute lifeline for our business because we believe that animals should not only have a good life, but a compassionate death. And we believe that that is impossible unless the abattoir is relatively close to where the farm is. And I think as a farmer, I think that unless we can see the emergence of a network of small abattoirs which cover the whole of the United Kingdom and ideally within, say, 30 miles of the furthest away farm in the catchment area, we will simply not be able to enable the transition that is necessary for the whole of agriculture to regenerative, agroecological, sustainable farming systems. Because I think that for a farmer who's contemplating this transition, and I would say that is the vast majority of all the farmers in the UK right now, if they introduce a livestock enterprise, if they haven't had one before, then the story of the animal's life and its journey to slaughter and the slaughter itself is an absolutely critical factor if we are to rebuild and retain the trust of the farm, the consuming public, in ensuring that they will support our livestock enterprises. And so I would just say, give this message to DEFRA. The small abattoir renaissance is not a marginal issue. It's an absolutely central component of the transition plan. I hope that George Eustace realises this. I hope the Prime Minister realises it. And I hope that anybody who's in a position of power or influence, including the supermarkets, will see that we have to do everything possible to enable this network of small abattoirs to be available to farmers throughout the country. And just one last word on supermarkets. Of course, I am currently sending animals from our dairy herd to supermarkets through the organic supply chain. But in many cases, they're traveling very long distances to the abattoirs. I feel really bad about this. And I think that supermarkets, if you want to retain the loyalty of your own customers, you have to be part of this transition. So please make this a central issue in the regenerative farming plans of the future.
Thank you, Patrick. We now move on to Kath Dalmeny of Sustain. Kath, what has Sustain's work highlighted about the importance of short supply chain infrastructure such as small abattoirs?
Thank you very much. And I think the word loyalty from Patrick coming there is deeply ironic, given that Asda has just given up on British beef farmers. It's quite obvious that that kind of supply chain is not loyal to people and is really not fit for purpose. Let me bring up on screen one slide, because we've done a bit of work on looking at the sorts of things that might be needed if we're really going serious about the notion of having a period of time where we want to make the rapid transition to agroecology. I crowdsourced this slide from a lot of colleagues to say, what would you say needs to happen? So we want to use this to have the kind of conversation with people about what are the pieces that would need to be put in place that are the true infrastructure for making sure that agroecological farming will thrive. And Sustain is working a lot on the farm transition support, the ELMS, the farm advice and training kind of stuff. So I'll leave that to one side for a moment, because the rest of the conference has talked about that a lot. But there's also the routes to better market, the right scale infrastructure. And that is exactly where the abattoirs sit. The right scale infrastructure that allows for the right sort of farming to thrive and for all the good work that is done by the farmers in the field to then enjoy the value of that product and for that to be retained as far as possible locally through all of the processing. I'll just whiz around the rest of the circle before getting back to that. It's actually an oval, more of an egg. There's also the policy and finance, and I think these two things are intimately linked across the piece. So you can't have a network of small-scale abattoirs unless the money is going into it. In another session that one of my colleagues attended during the Oxford Rural Farming Conference yesterday, I believe, they were talking about how the supermarket infrastructure has benefited enormously from public subsidy. There's been car parks funded in supermarkets by European money. There's been all kinds of road networks supported. There's been infrastructure put in place to help with processing and with things like marketing and turning primary produce into processed product, funded by EU money, but into the supermarkets, so that our public money has been funding the kind of processing wasn't actually helping the farmers all that much. So we should be rising up and claiming the money that will now be liberated from the European Union systems. We've always been promised a thing called the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, all the way since Brexit. Sorry to be the person to mention the B word so late in the conference, but we were promised that the money that came in from the structural funds would be spent in ways that helped rural communities, communities that have had less attention, and that would also fuel the climate agenda. Well, food and farming, as we know, has been rather left out of the climate agenda, and yet large amounts of money will be being invested in green jobs. Green jobs should be about sustainable food. It should be about investing in the infrastructure that makes sustainable food possible. The packing houses, the warehouses, the abattoirs, the places where the food can be transformed in a way that then can reach its market and the consumers who want it. The LEPs, we were putting quite a lot of effort into chatting up the local enterprise partnerships. We now hear that they're going to be disbanded. This is the trouble, isn't it? Institutions get set up and then disbanded. They were pretty awful anyway in terms of engaging. Well, not all of them, but only a few of them have ever really understood food. They tend to be in traditional agricultural areas such as Devon. But whatever infrastructure, finance infrastructure is put in place over the next few months, we should all keep an eye on that and also be lobbying to ensure that good food and farming is included in their agendas and is understood as part of the climate, community regeneration, economic development agenda. And abattoirs should get a slice of that pie, unintended. There's also the sustainable diets element. And whilst we're in a meeting like this, I will imagine there's lots of meat farmers and people who are involved in the meat trade. So I put my hand up to it being quite contentious to say the less and better meat aspect, but we understand that that is very much about less of the bad stuff and more of the good stuff, and making sure that that is integrated into mixed farming systems and into high welfare systems, extensive, that do the right things for the climate. There's also things like public sector contracts. It would be possible, it isn't currently the case, but it would be possible to put into public sector contracts that they should be working with small scale infrastructure, local food infrastructure, helping to support supply chains. Where we've seen really good work on public sector institutional purchasing, there's been, for example, in Manchester, a cooperative enterprise between Kindling Trust and a wholesaler and a university to actually talk about planting plans and to talk about buying in a way that suits the agroecological imperative. How wonderful. Why isn't that happening everywhere? We don't want to be stuck in a period where we're only doing little islands of good practice and it's not spreading. We need to get good at packaging up the benefits of how we want to do things and then putting them to the people who will do the purchasing, who will liberate the money and will invest in these things. We also should be upping the fruit and veg content of our diet. So I put in the sustainable diet things because that's also about the right scale, the right amounts of the right kinds of foods that will support both our health and the planet at the same time. There's also the things about, I've put in another box which is called access to land. There should, of course, be some kind of national land use strategy, and these sorts of things are starting to come through. George Eustace's announcements yesterday to do with, how much of the UK landmass may be rewilded, or and how much of it may be done in a kind of sharing kind of way with wildlife. All those things are now coming through and starting to be built into the ELM systems, the Sustainable Farming Initiative type payments. But we also need the infrastructure on that land, the packing houses, the drying rooms, the small scale abattoirs, those assets that would enable this kind of work to thrive, the food hubs, the packing rooms, all of these things. And it is possible for us to package up the case for these things to the people who will hold the money. And we've got some projects going on, and my colleague Vicky Hurd, I think, is in the audience. You might be able to paste in some of the links to these things, looking at what farmers want from this. Of course, this is incredibly important. Often they don't get asked. What they would like to do is, when we asked 500 farmers, or my colleagues asked 500 farmers, how you would like to have your produce purchased, lots of them were saying, I really would like access to some of these local supply chains, to more loyal supply chains, those that will return a higher proportion of the value of the purchase to the farmer, so they're enabled to do the agroecological transformation and have a decent income, to be involved in these things. But we've got to get good at facilitating it to the markets. And it's been fantastic during this conference that there's been several sessions on the types of agroecological retail, we were calling it, agroecological shopkeepers and distribution, supply chain distribution, dynamic procurement, the kinds of things that will really join this stuff up and link it to good contracts, good, well-organized market outlets, large-scale boxes, retailers that make the connection with the consumers, because the farmers cannot do all of this on their own. It's not fair. It's not even possible sometimes to do it because he's so busy out in the fields. So we must get more well-organized markets, principled and in solidarity with agroecological farmers to make all of that happen. Abattoirs are central to that. I'm not a meat supply chain specialist, but I was asked to talk about the whole context of all of these things. And we are deeply interested in how we can understand how to present all of this to policymakers, what language to use, what benefits to talk about, what agendas to trigger with them, because they're interested mainly in economic growth and jobs. So we need to package this up in a way that they really understand, and also show the benefits in terms of climate, locality, community, keeping farmers in business. So that's my whistle-stop tour of the sorts of things that we are concerned to look at. And we are trying to do work on all of these things in all directions with different teams of people, and we would very much welcome working with you to make this possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kath, for your presentation. Thank you. Next, we've got Tom Blunt from the RBST. And the question for Tom is, what impact does the state of the abattoir network have for native breed farmers?
So yeah, thank you for asking me to talk today. So as well as my role with the Rare Breed Survival Trust, I am a native breed farmer myself. We've got red poll cattle and Suffolk sheep just in North Buckinghamshire. But yeah, in terms of abattoirs, so for breeders of rare and native breeds, I suppose one of the biggest challenges is finding appropriate abattoirs for their animals. For many keepers of rare and native breeds, they tend to market their produce and their products outside of the conventional supply chain, so away from livestock markets or direct to meat processors. As often we don't tend to get the animals sort of true value. It's something I've experienced personally with our own red poll cattle. So in order to have a sort of a financially viable business, they choose to add value to their products. So this is creating their own markets, generally sort of direct selling to the end consumer. So obviously, as a consequence of this, it is vital that breeders can access local small abattoirs. Too many farmers that I speak to have to travel huge distances to get to the nearest abattoir. And I think it's not just the number of abattoirs. I think we need to remember it's also the actual general distribution of them over the country. So where I am located personally, I'm quite fortunate that there is a number of abattoirs not too far away, but I know that's not the case for a number of people. So that's something that needs to be looked at as well. I think the ability to access small abattoirs is critical for these producers and their business. Certainly over the last few years, there's been an increase in consumer demand for high quality produce, and the story behind each of the individual breeds and the way in which they're reared and the type of system they're farmed on. And having a local abattoir is part of this story as well. So it's critical that that is there for these breeders and farmers. So native breed farmers, I suppose we need abattoirs that cater for small numbers of perhaps what we'd call non-standard animals. So provide the facilities for private kills, and also enable breeders to access the fifth quarter. I know personally my local abattoir, it's relatively difficult if we want to access the skins or the horns to sort of add value to our produce that way as well. So I know that can be a challenge and is something that needs to be investigated. They need to also be able to deliver this obviously without lowering any of the welfare standards. But with breeders looking to add value to their produce, finding an abattoir that will accept private kills is obviously vital, but also a need for them to be easily accessible. For those with local abattoirs, as Patrick mentioned earlier, actually being able to book into them can be quite difficult. There's certainly a high demand, for these services. So that is a challenge itself. There's also the challenge of the type of abattoir. So Some of perhaps the larger abattoirs are more single species focused. And obviously a number of our native breed producers sort of run multi-species businesses. So having access to an abattoir that can cater for that obviously is critical as well. So last year we undertook a survey to look at the sort of commercial trends of rare and native breeds. And of the respondents, 42% stated that a lack of suitable abattoirs was one of the greatest barriers to keeping rare breeds and to their business growth. Obviously, this is concerning from both a business perspective, but also when you come down to the individual breeds and their future as well within the industry. Obviously, for some of our other breeders, there's other challenges along the way. So the over 30-month rule and some abattoirs not necessarily accepting animals. I know my local abattoir doesn't have to travel further away for these animals. Obviously, a number of our breeds, the native breeds, are known for their sort of slow maturing, and especially farmers that run extensive systems. So I think it's important to look at not just the number of abattoirs, but also the services that they're able to offer as well. So the ability for breeders to access small abattoirs and add value to their produce is critical for the business, but also for the individual breeds as well and their sort of commercial viability. So yeah, that's all from me.
Thank you very much, Tom. So now we've got Peter Greig. Peter.
Or have you got Andy?
Oh, sorry, yeah, you're right. Thank you for the correction. I'm getting carried away. Yeah, so sorry, Andy Gray. Andy, you've got the sorry, muted as well. Andy, you've got the fur farm mobile actually at your farm at the moment. How do you see the future for the operation of mobile abattoirs?
Right, thanks very much for the question. But I would quickly just pop in. Our company mainly supplies hotels and restaurants in Devon and Cornwall. So we're connecting the two biggest industries with multi-million-pound turnovers by a very small piece of infrastructure, which costs very little. And I think this is, you go to Devon and Cornwall, you expect to eat Devon and Cornish crab. You should also expect to be able to source locally slaughtered, locally reared meat. And the lack of slaughterhouses is part of a problem. So skipping on to the how I see this fur farm mobile unit working. The mobile unit is on the back of a full-sized articulated lorry, which gets parked. The trailer gets parked and the cab goes away. So it's quite a big bit of infrastructure. The most likely use, I think, or we think, is that it could go via hubs, and the hubs would have to have a certain amount of the infrastructure which the slaughterhouse doesn't actually deal with. So the slaughterhouse, basically, you push the piece of livestock in one end and it gets disassembled and comes out at the other end, but you still need the lairage to hold the cattle or sheep or pigs. You need a ramp to get them up to the killing box. You need a washdown facility to handle the equipment in it, as well as the delivery vehicles that are bringing the cattle to and from it. You need extra chilling space, and you need pest control and all the paperwork that the FSA would demand and require, HACCP records, diaries, and all the other paraphernalia. You'll need a vet's office. You need WCs and other comfort facilities, possibly some way of handling laundry, and then you've got to be able to handle the waste, the Cat 2 and Cat 3 byproducts. All of that has to be taken away. So it's not as simple as just parking it in a piece of concrete somewhere in the middle of nowhere, but none of that infrastructure is actually insurmountable. All of it is quite easy to build. And actually, the big thing with this mobile slaughterhouse is the biggest bit of capital expenditure is the unit itself. The peripheral bits are less expensive, and a good cooperative could put that together quite well. The other benefit of the unit is the fact that it generally will bring its it's skilled labor with it. You can use local labor, or else you can move labor with it. And I think when talking about when talking about small scale slaughterhouses and building them, everybody forgets you've got to man them. And actually these people, I've been in slaughter for 30 years. It's a rare skill set of being able to do all the jobs and fill in all the forms and everything else. And people like us and my employees don't grow on trees. So the fact that you can move that expertise with the slaughterhouse as well as use local expertise is critical to how this unit might work. There are other options. You could carry out on-farm slaughter. And what could be better? If you've got a big enough unit, I've got a friend who's producing about 800 cattle a year for M&S, and potentially you could put this on this slaughter unit on the end of his handling facility and park a lorry trailer with a chiller in it, beefed up one, because obviously the normal ones don't have enough cold air going into them, but a beefed up lorry unit, and you could just keep pushing the quarters into it and fill it up, and away you go. Once it's full, close the doors and take it away. It could run on a standby unit. So there's another option. Or else, in our case, we're a catering, butchers and meat box company. So we've already got most of those facilities, and we can we don't have to actually have that extra expenditure. We've also got the holding number and everything else. There's quite a bit of extra paperwork involved in this sort of thing. I will say with the FSA and AFA, they have historically been quite difficult, but they are softening, and they have been extremely helpful with trying to get this unit licensed. I think they can see the virtue in it, and they've been given quite a good push by Jane Parker along the way as well. So yeah, that's really how I see it. There's probably other options which I haven't touched on, but there's hubs. There's on-farm, and then there's parking outside of cutting plants like ours, where the meat can go straight from one to the other. And the reality in life is you don't know till you try it. So the brilliant thing with Firth Farm is they brought this thing over, and we're going to give it a try, and then we'll know, and we'll find the bottlenecks and the difficult bits, and work our way around them. But from a perspective of not moving livestock about, this is the ultimate dream ticket. So I think that's me done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. That was very good. Good to hear that there's different options available for using the mobile as well there. So we'll thank you for that. So we'll now move on to Peter. Peter, you had a vision when you and Henry started Piper's Farm more than 30 years ago that was built around a belief that small-scale farming businesses were the most sustainable way to produce food. How would you describe your vision of food production over the next 10 years and beyond?
Thank you, John. I'm conscious that I'm coming in just before John Powell, and I'm really thrilled to say that John has been so involved in the conference, the fact that DEFRA are so engaged now, and as Andy said, they've done a lot of work with the mobile unit to try and move this process forwards. But I'm just going to sort of challenge ahead of John what I believe has become part of the narrative, that exporting food either into the EU or to a distant market on the other side of the world is the sort of holy grail. The point I want to start with is, and this is central to our vision for 10 years and beyond, the real gold standard is locally produced food sold directly to customers who know exactly where it has come from. And if we then join that up with some of the points Kath made earlier about needing to develop routes to better markets, our core principle is that a route to market is totally dependent on and dictated by hard-nosed commercial reality. Customers buy a product because they perceive it to be good value. Part of value is it's something that they like the sound of, but the fact is they will not come back to buy that product again unless their experience really defines the total definition of value. very excitingly, many more customers are becoming aware of the importance of the food they put into their body and the crucial impact that has on their health, how much they enjoy life, mental health, physical health, everything in between is determined by their gut biome and the food they stick in their mouth. So it is critical as food producers, as farmers. We aren't commodity producers. Our job is to produce good nutrition, wholesome nutrition that gives people pleasure. And we as a nation of farmers should be totally focused on what we can do to satisfy real market demand domestically. So the first thing I really want to challenge John with, why we cannot be hung up either on regulations which have become dictated historically by our membership of the EU, that is history. And secondly, we absolutely cannot let the concept of being able to send food to the other side of the world get in the way of this discussion. This discussion is about how do we connect hundreds of farming businesses who desperately want to be able to understand, have pride in the fruits of their labors. They want to know that their hard work has produced food that somebody they know is real has gained health and pleasure from it. So really, that is the vision. We see a rural revolution. We see a repopulated, digitalized landscape, many different enterprises. So if you like, go back to the future, go back 50, 60 years. Nicolette Hyman last night put a brilliant picture up which depicted the Midwest, I think perhaps 70 or 80 years ago. So many different human beings actively engaged in the production of food. And that's the point. Food should be central to functional rural landscapes. And because the landscapes are now digitalized, that can become a reality. But my final point, I, along with Henry and many others, have had 30 years of confronting DEFRA's perception of where the meat supply chain sits. Meat, because of BSE, became treated like nuclear material. It shouldn't be. Meat should be part of a healthy, locally consumed diet. So I just want to make two particular observations. Andy talked about the vet's office that has to go with this mobile abattoir. I'm sorry, but that is a nonsense. Also, I'm very concerned about the treatment of waste. If a healthy animal is eating grass in a field 1 minute and 20 minutes later it is hanging up in the cold room of an abattoir, the gut content of that animal is not a hazardous material. So we just need real hard-nosed common sense. Every step of the supply chain has to be totally focused on commercial reality, and there is no place in that for money being wasted or barriers being put in the way by regulators who don't embrace the incredible opportunity we have here for a truly agroecological vision for the next 10 years and beyond.
Thank you, Peter, very much for that presentation. We're now followed with John Powell. Welcome, John. What changes can small abattoirs expect to see this year in terms of risk-based proportional regulation and financial support that they can access to improve productivity?
Thanks, John. And first of all, thank you for the invitation to speak as part of this very prestigious panel of speakers. I feel very humbled to be a part of this group. And just generally, as you know, has been mentioned, the opportunity for DEFRA to play an active part in this session. It's a very important subject for you, but also for DEFRA. And really from the outset, I want to make clear and to reinforce the fact that DEFRA recognises the role that small abattoirs play in supporting the rural economy, and welfare issues such as providing shorter times to slaughter. And we are very much committed to working closely with the small abattoir sector on the challenges that it is facing. And we know that they are a number of challenges that, as we've seen with the number of small abattoirs falling in recent years. We do have regular engagement with stakeholders in the small abattoir sector, perhaps in a more formal context, but nevertheless, the small abattoir group that I chair, which meets twice a year, does bring together a wide range of sector stakeholders, gives us the opportunity to discuss those key issues that are affecting the sector, and for DEFRA to be aware of what they are, and for us likewise to share information with the industry. I'm also pleased that in recent months we've, and more so just in recent days actually, we've been able to set up a subgroup working with the ASG that another industry representative that's enabling us to be able to take some of these big issues and focus in on them to enable us to actually find together where it's possible practical solutions to the challenges that the industry is facing. Of course, FSA and the RPA are also very active engaging with the abattoir sector. And I know some people see us as being sometimes disjointed, but I can assure you that we behind the scenes do work closely together. And as part of the small abattoir group, we do bring together all of the key bodies and agencies that are involved in working with the abattoir sector. I think it's also worth reiterating too that the government has a manifesto commitment that we want people both at home and abroad to be lining up to buy British. And obviously to increase both domestic and overseas demand, the intention of the government is to use the UK's growing reputation for high quality food and drink produced to high standards of food safety, animal welfare and sustainability. And we believe that this gives an opportunity for small abattoirs and will provide a catalyst for growth for all regions of the UK. And we mustn't forget too that the opportunities to promote locally produced food sold and enjoyed at the local level. And hopefully that aligns with the points that Peter was just making. There was two key issues, I think, in the question that stressed to me, and I'm conscious of the time. The first one was what changes can small abattoirs expect to see this year in terms of risk-based proportional regulation? I'll try and cover that briefly, but also financial support that they can access to improve productivity. On regulation, there are two key areas where the government is actively working to address the regulatory framework: the livestock information programme that's been running now for some time, and also the FSA's operational transformation programme. The livestock information programme has already made changes to transforming the way that the animal movement system works, and that will continue in 22. But I suspect the major impact on abattoirs is likely to be the Food Standard Agency's operational transformation programme. To be clear, this is a long-term programme. Changes will happen, but they're not going to happen quickly. And also because of the fact that any major changes that are introduced will require changes to legislation. That said, in 2022, the FSA's programme are looking to introduce improved technology and risk segmentation into their audit processes, so that particularly those highly compliant businesses can expect to see less frequent audits going forward, or even for some audit activities to be carried out remotely. Outside of the transformation programme, FSA has also recently concluded the Stage 5 pilot through their business as usual work, which was conducted in 9 small abattoirs across the country with a view to reducing some of the admin burdens. The feedback that FSA received from the abattoir owners has been positive, and this is now something that the FSA will look to progress and roll out on a wider scale. And I can assure you that I will be working with the FSA and together with the ASG on this rollout plan. And I intend that one of the subgroup meetings will particularly focus on this particular piece of work. Secondly, in terms of the regulatory framework, at the request of ministers, DEFRA and particularly my team is looking at the existing legislative framework covering abattoirs to identify those areas where flexibility is possible, particularly and especially in a post-EU membership environment. We've also established, together with the Food Standards Agency and the RPA, a working group to look specifically at administrative challenges that the industry is facing. We have pledged to look at and respond to queries received from industry, and we're suggesting that these are submitted to us through the ASG. The second point was funding. Under the powers of the Agricultural Act, abattoirs are eligible to receive government funding, but to do so, abattoirs need to demonstrate that the finance received will also directly support producers. So we have been working again with the ASG and will continue to do so in the coming weeks and months to identify what this actually looks like in practice. But I can reassure you that DEFRA is very supportive of finding innovative solutions to address the problems that the sector is faced in. There are one key example has already been mentioned, is the fact that the Rural Development Programme is funding the farmer-led mobile abattoir project. I know it's perhaps taken a bit longer than we thought, and it's thrown up a few challenges along the way, but one of the benefits that this is a pilot, and it enables us to identify these sorts of problems, to be able to identify how to resolve them so that in future applications, one hopes can be resolved more quickly. We certainly hope that the project will be operational very soon, and our intention is that if it is successful, as we think and sure it will be, that this can be replicated elsewhere by industry, and that funding would be made available to do so. The other key funding mechanism is DEFRA's Farming Investment Fund, which went live last year. We did submit a list of potential items with the ASG that might be eligible for funding, which unfortunately didn't make the first, and I have to say, very competitive first round. But the second round is planned for 22, and we are actively exploring what opportunities there are to support producers through the Farming Transformation Fund. And this could and is likely to provide support to producers wanting to process and add value to their products. And I hope that we can find ways of building small abattoirs into proposals that would be able to achieve that particular aim. More details will be available as the scheme is designed and information becomes available. In addition, there's also a new added value theme that's been looked at, which again will be launched in 2022. And specifically here, and linked to this whole process of adding value, we're looking again to see where there is the opportunity to offer support to producer-owned abattoirs and to producers wishing to establish, as I've mentioned, mobile abattoirs. So in conclusion, there are both challenges and opportunities ahead in 22 and beyond. We are actively looking to reduce the administrative burden on abattoirs, but I have to be honest and say this will take time, as legislation will be required for many of the changes to be introduced. And that is a part of us inheriting EU legislation, but the intention is to seek to simplify the system where it is possible to do so. And secondly, new post-EU funding schemes are now starting to come online, and we are actively working and within DEFRA and also with the sector to ensure abattoirs are able to access those available funds. Thank you, and I look forward to taking any questions anyone may have later. Thank you. John.
Thank you very much, John, for that very informative presentation. So we now move on to Marisa Heath. Marisa, what needs to happen politically to facilitate change in the small abattoir sector?
Hi, John. As I mentioned, my internet's not great, so I'm going to speak, and I'll keep it quite short and put some information in the chat about what we need politically to keep this moving forward. Somebody said earlier, why do we need mobile abattoirs when we just need to remove the red tape for the existing small abattoirs? And that's exactly what we're trying to do at the sector group. And John has covered quite a lot of that a moment ago. The sector group was set up last year as a result of the reports from the Sustainable Food Trust and APGOR, and we're looking to cover England, Wales and Scotland, particularly recognising that Scotland's got huge patches of no provision for abattoirs. Sector groups are recognised by government unified and informed voice and have a role in providing advice on shaping policy. And so far, so good, in that we've had some progress. You may have seen there's been quite a few mentions of small abattoirs in parliamentary debates. The EFRA, which is the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee, has mentioned and raised small abattoirs a number of times, and within the media. So politically, things have moved forward. But there is one big problem, and that is time. And we know time is not on our side when it comes to preventing more closures of small abattoirs. And when it comes to influencing policy and getting legislative change, as John has just pointed out, it's a really slow burn activity. So when regulations need to be amended, it takes a lot of time, and it's right, it does, because it needs to be the right amendments. So we recognise that. And we are working with DEFRA, as John has just outlined. I don't need to repeat that, but we also have recognised the need to move with some sort of urgency. Task force at the moment, which is just about to start, again, John mentioned it, which is focusing on the 3 areas he mentioned: the regulations, the funding, and we're also looking at the management of waste and create kind of collective working models to get more value out of the waste. So we're hoping to expedite that work quite swiftly and come back to interested parties in 6 months, which will be June time, and let them know what we've actually got out of that. Hopefully some sort of idea on where we go with funding there. But what we need is the wider sector, and that's really down to farmers, that's butchers, that's retailers and the abattoir operators, to keep the pressure on, to keep raising this issue, because I think we've got it really quite high up the agenda, and I think people are talking about it now, and we can't release that pressure. We need to keep pushing. So we need people to be contacting their local MP, to be contacting ministers, and actually even raising with local politicians as well, because they're all working on their net zero strategies and their rural. And that's really a key area here. It's those sustainable rural economies that people are looking to boost post-COVID. Is a really crucial issue for both national and local government. Now, local food keeps getting referenced in parliamentary debates, but few are talking about the infrastructure required to facilitate this. And that needs to keep being raised and raised again, so that it's understood by politicians. That it sounds great talking about local food, it really does, but unless you've got that infrastructure there, it's not going to happen. We know it's nationally a really important issue, and it's also really relevant to many MPs. They may not think about it, but a lot of them are in rural, or a lot of them are getting pressure about climate change and net zero and animal welfare and all of these sorts of issues. So I just say to everyone on the call, please help us by raising it with your local politicians and keeping it up there, because we feel we are finally getting some traction here, and I'm delighted by some of the things that John has just said. And I really hope we can produce something mid-year on this. I'll put some more things in the chat because I'm conscious my Wi-Fi was probably terrible.
It did better than I thought it was going to do, Marisa. So thank you for that. It was okay. Right. So I've got a few questions come through now. I'd like to just apologies if I don't get to all these, because we've only got like about 12 minutes left on the session.
And I'm going to give my apologies and leave. So I've got to go on to the closing plenary, which starts directly after this. Please join us for the closing plenary. Wonderful to spend time with you. Very keen to support local food infrastructure work. So we'll be very keen to pick up conversations on this. Good luck with the rest of it.
Kath.
And I'll see you in the next session if you're coming.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kath, for taking part. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, so I've got a question here from Dominic, who's asking, apart from some nods and winks from DEFRA and the FSA, he said there is no substantive policy shift towards supporting local supply chains, of which small abattoirs are an essential node. So what's missing, and why is the message not getting across? John Powell, are you okay to answer that?
Yeah, of course. The first thing I can assure you that DEFRA is very much focused on supply chains and local supply chains particularly. I think we've all seen the impact of COVID in the last year, where it was supply chains that kept the food supply to the public going, and we're very grateful for that. I think the first thing to say is that I think we have to recognise that we've just left the EU. We're still, in many cases, we've retained EU legislation into law. The checks and controls, for example, that the FSA implement, which I just referred to a few minutes ago, If they are going to change, they're going to need legislative changes. That means being part of a legislative programme with Parliament. That is not a quick and easy thing to progress and to get through. But the fact is, FSA have put in place an operational transformation programme that is in place, is being undertaken, is being delivered. It may appear to be slowly, and yes, in some cases there are things we'd like to do quicker, but there are clear restraints upon just the ability to do things so quickly. But nevertheless, that programme is in place and will gradually and over time, we will see the effects of that on, I hope, simpler administrative processes and the like. In terms of supply chains more generally, I mean, DEFRA is putting in place a number of funding schemes. I've referred to the Farm Investment Fund that is looking at adding value to local products, looking at strengthening local supply chains, and I very much hope that we can find clear ways of ensuring that small abattoirs are incorporated within that, to work closely with producers at the local level to strengthen that bonds between the animal on the farm through the abattoir to the consumer. So I think there are things that happen, and yes, government sometimes doesn't act as quickly as people want them to. I can assure you that that doesn't mean we're not looking at things or we're not trying to tackle things, but particularly where there's legislation involved, it just does take time. So bear with us.
Okay, thank you, John. I've got a question here from Jess. Do the public need to be better educated about the realities of large-scale abattoirs to encourage change? How can this be done without alienating people? Patrick, would you like to answer that one?
Well, I'm not sure if I can answer it, except to say I think it's a brilliant idea, and I'd love to know what John thinks of that, because it seems to me that it's the story of animal slaughter. It's a really interesting situation where, in a way, the supermarkets and anybody who's involved with the meat trade doesn't want to show the public the bad story behind industrial slaughter, because it would further depress meat sales. So anybody who's involved in that chain, including people like me, in a way have an interest in not showing that, because it's embarrassing and it's actually worse than that. But what we really ought to do is to show it, because funnily enough, unless the public wake up to what a bad story it is at the moment, we're not going to move to something which is a better story. And of course, there are people who say that because, as was pointed out in the chat, Temple Grandin is already involved with designing some of this large-scale abattoirs. Critics of small-scale abattoirs will say, well, they're not very well designed and the welfare is not always good. But of course, that's a financial issue. And I think the crucial thing is the distance to the abattoir, because that's the thing which we can't get away from. Even if the abattoir, when the animals get there, is well designed, the distance to abattoir is really the shocking thing, and also the fact that these very large-scale industrial abattoirs dehumanize the whole process. So I'd love to know what John thinks about that. It's not really fair to put you on the spot, John, but hey.
Okay, thank you for that, Patrick. I just want to get through a few more questions, if that's okay. I've got Christopher Price here, who's saying, yesterday George Eustace told the Oxford Farming Conference that there is no problem with the capacity of the abattoir network in England, though I accepted there are challenges in the rest of the UK. Was he wrong? I think if you don't mind, I'd like to take that one. Large abattoirs are about throughput. Small abattoirs are about adding value by the work that they do and the way that they do it and the animals that they work with and the meat that's produced from them. They're an entirely different entity. And that's why, as you've seen people in the chat say that the large abattoirs don't want their animals, it's obviously all about throughput, because that's why some of them have become single species, because when they're doing more than one species, it reduces the throughput. And obviously when they go to single species, that means somebody else who has a different animal in their processing has to take them further to travel. So I think George needs to talking about functionality and what abattoirs actually do. And if he's serious about farmers actually being able to market their own products and produce them and add value, to their own businesses on the farm, then the small abattoirs are the means to do that. And the large ones are not the means to do that, because they're all about throughput. Even Joe Biden, you know, is looking at the fact that the US has become too centralized with large abattoirs. Their industry has become too top heavy. And we've seen all the problems with COVID, you know, with animals backing up on farm in the US and here as well. And this is all to do with the fact that we've not got a well-distributed set of abattoirs of all different sizes that all do different things. And this is the danger. If we just talk about capacity, and then we're just talking about throughput, it's not about capacity, it's about functionality. And we see what happens when functionality falls down. We've seen the pig crisis. You know, we need to be have a more resilient system. So that will be my answer to George. Somebody's asking, is it legal, Richard? Is it legal to transport poultry off the farm for slaughter or not? It is legal. There are several poultry abattoirs that take turkeys and chickens that I know of from different producers, and obviously they've licenses to do that. That's one for that. There's a lot for John Powell here. You're very popular, John.
Not many DEFRA people can say that, are there? So should be grateful.
Yeah. Okay. So I've got one here from Francesca. As a new entrant, small-scale mixed livestock producer on the Isle of Wight, how can we help the campaign to get a mobile or a small abattoir here? We're facing a perfect storm of having no abattoir on the island, and we're now down to one haulier, so don't have much choice as to which abattoir we can use.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm fully aware of the situation on the Isle of Wight, where, as you say, they don't have an abattoir. I'm very much hoping that once the current mobile abattoir project is completed, and we see that it is a success, that we can replicate it. And I've mentioned the intention is to make funding available under the Farm Investment Fund to create more opportunities for mobile abattoirs. So that would be a solution. Of course, there is always a commercial solution, is that someone could set up an abattoir on the island, and that would be for a commercial decision. But certainly, DEFRA is looking to see the outcome of the mobile abattoir project and if that can be replicated on the island.
Okay. Just one more question here from Richard. Rather than mobile abattoirs, why don't the regulators release some of the red tape preventing small producers for slaughtering on farm? It all seems counterintuitive.
Okay, do you want me to take that one as well?
Yeah,
no problem.
I think you're going to say is we're a one-size-fits-all system because of the EU at the moment.
Exactly. That exactly the thing. The regulatory framework at the moment applies horizontally, and don't forget, many of the regulatory requirements are there to ensure protection of animal welfare. CCTV was introduced. Yes, I know it's expensive, but it's there to ensure the animal welfare standards are maintained and apply. And as I've mentioned before, the FSA's operational transformation program is now starting to look at the regulatory burden, what implications can take place, and to try and implement a program. Yes, it will take legislative changes in many cases, but that is our intention, to look at its implication. But let's be clear, there are certain things that we're not going to remove because animal welfare is vitally important. We need, if we're going to retain our high standards of welfare and for animals, that not just for the domestic market, for export, then there will be certain things we need to maintain and protect, and that will cost abattoirs money. But I think we have to recognise that they are important. So I'm being quick, because there's just a minute left.
Just about a minute left. Peter, be quick, otherwise I won't get time to thank everybody.
Good on you. I was feeling really, really encouraged by what John was saying. It's fantastic to hear John responding to somebody like Francesca on the Isle of Wight. A real commercial opportunity there for that mobile abattoir to fill a void. But Patrick talked about dehumanisation of the supply chain caused by industrial scale abattoirs. The last point John made there made me worried that they, FSA, are too consumed with industrial scale narrative. You mentioned export and animal welfare for export again. The best animal welfare in the world is probably going to occur behind John's butcher shop in his family abattoir, or behind a high street butcher shop, because for them, animal welfare has always been absolutely gold standard. So please, DEFRA, don't get carried away with the belief that somehow big industrial scale is where your learning, your thinking needs to be at, because it won't really address the future vision that's achievable.
I hear that, and I think what we want to see is good animal welfare on all farms, irrespective of where they are slaughtered.
Yeah, I think what we're after is some proportionality and risk-based, aren't we? We're not after reducing standards. We're just asking that the actual regulations provide an environment where you can be a small abattoir in this country, you know, and that's the challenge for us, because the regulations, as I've just said, are based big, small, they're right across the board. However you do it, you know, they're there, and the FSA themselves acknowledge that this one size fits all does not work. And that's why we've got the operational transformation program. And obviously the challenge is to get through some of those things so small abattoirs on the ground can see a difference and can plan succession in their businesses, because that's the biggest challenge for them at the moment. Until they see action, then there's always going to be that, you know, butcher's cleaver hanging over them. And that's the reality of it.
Absolutely, John. And that's why the FSA will be working with the ASG in the coming weeks and months to look at what specific actions we can take, and to look at the priorities and to identify where there are opportunities. So I think the general direction is very clear, and I'm supportive of what you were saying, Peter, in many respects, but it will just take time. I think we have to recognise that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're out of time, ladies and gentlemen. I'd just like to thank our guest speakers for their time this afternoon, and for you, the audience, for your questions and interest in this session. And thank you very much for the Sustainable Food Trust for allowing me to chair this session. I wish everybody a good evening.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.